Support comes from Gather Pottery, a clay studio in Seattle's Interbay neighborhood offering memberships and classes, hosting Petals and Pottery, a flower arranging class using ceramic vessels created by Gather Potters, on April 28th. More at gatherpottery.com. Support comes from the San Juan Islands. Spring in the San Juans can provide time to slow down and savor the scenery of quiet beaches, hiking, biking, and whale watching on Lopez, Orcas, and San Juan Island and Friday Harbor. Learn more at visitsanjuans.com. Set your mind to island time.
From KUOW in Seattle, I'm Monica Nicholsberg.
And I'm Joshua McNichols. You're listening to Booming. Today we're talking about the new mommy track.
Record numbers of new moms are joining the labor force thanks to the rise of hybrid work.
We're seeing this really interesting trend. Women with young children are jumping back into the labor force.
But as one of them, I can tell you there are some downsides that don't get captured in the data.
You're going to have to stay home with mommy and daddy because you know how you've been coughing and your eye's a little itchy?
Yeah. The pandemic ushered in what some call a golden era for working moms. But I've been wondering if hybrid work really allows women to have it all or if it's just doubling their labor.
And remember how we talked about being cooperative and working together? Because mommy's got to work.
Compromise.
Compromise, that's right.
Compromise.
Coming up, I talked to an expert about why hybrid work may not be the golden ticket to balancing career and motherhood that we thought it was.
Can you say cooperative?
No.
Okay.
But first, Joshua, what have you been looking into this week?
Well, I just got a peek at what Seattle's going to look like in 20 years. There's this document called the Comprehensive Plan, and, you know, it may sound kind of wonky to a lot of people, but it's a really important document that kind of maps out how Seattle is going to grow over the next 2 decades. I've been waiting for this thing to come out for like 2 years now, and now we have the draft of this plan.
2 years is a long time to wait, so I know that you're probably still going through it, but what stood out to you?
Well, when I look at this document, I look at it in terms of housing. I want to see where are they going to allow more housing because we need, you know, around 100,000 new homes by the year 2044 to make room for all the people who are moving here. One place they're going to start funneling more housing is in these sort of neighborhood nodes. Have you ever been walking through a residential neighborhood and you kind of come upon like a little commercial area?
Yeah.
It's not big, but maybe there's a couple of restaurants, maybe a bar or something.
I love those.
Well, those are going to be the new neighborhood centers. Seattle wants to build up those, wants to make more apartments around them and sort of really celebrate them. And they'll become more lively, too. Interesting.
Well, I'm going to be keeping an eye on your reporting to see how Seattle is going to evolve over the next 20 years.
All right.
Now on to our main story for today. We're talking about what the hybrid work revolution really means for new parents. That's coming up after the break.
Support comes from the Discovery Inn on Washington's San Juan Island, an island getaway that's a ferry ride away, now taking reservations for summer and fall. More information and booking available at discoveryinn.com.
I'm Alex Schwartz.
I'm Nomi Fry.
I'm Vincent Cunningham, and this is Critics at Large, a New Yorker podcast for the culturally curious.
Each week, we're going to talk about a big idea that's showing up across the cultural landscape, and we'll trace it through all the mediums we love. Books, movies, television, music, art.
And I always want to talk about celebrity gossip, too.
Of course.
We hope you'll join us for new episodes each Thursday. Follow Critics at Large today, wherever you get podcasts.
So, Monica, tell me about what's going on with moms returning to work. I remember during the pandemic, a lot of women left the workforce to take care of their kids. What's happening now?
Yeah, when the pandemic hit, schools and childcare centers shut down. That left families stranded with their kids at home.
Economists and others are alarmed by the mass exodus of women taking place amid the coronavirus.
More than 2 million American women dropped out of the workforce over the course of just 2 months.
And there was a real panic over what people called a she-session, but it never really came to pass.
Economists thought there was no coming back for working women, but they were wrong.
The fear was that women would never return, but they did.
Take a look at this. According to the Labor Department, America saw a record number of women return to the workforce after the pandemic.
And even more surprising, moms who historically were likely to stay home with their young kids also joined the workforce.
Okay, so is remote work a good thing for moms and for other kinds of parents with small kids?
In many ways, yes, it is, but it's also complicated. Like, take my story, for example.
Okay.
I joined KUOW when my son was 18 months. I left work during the pandemic when he was born. And the only reason that this position really works for my family is because I have the freedom to work from home a few days a week. But that flexibility has some unexpected costs.
Thank you all for attending the January all-staff meeting. Welcome to 2024.
When my kid is sick or family's not available, he's home with my husband and me, and we just try to work and watch him the best that we can. But it doesn't always go so great.
What's in your mouth, bud? What was it?
I have no idea. Dog treat or something?
Yeah, we still don't actually know if he ate dog treats while I was trying to tune into our January all-staff, but they're organic. I mean, he's okay.
What did that?
I think it's yucky, whatever it is, honey.
So what did?
Yeah, just even spit it out. At least it's food.
I love that you can hear the all staff kind of droning on in the background while I assume you turned your camera off while all this was happening.
Yes, and you can also hear my husband's and my sighs, which is like a big soundtrack of the days when we're trying to work from home with our son. But yeah, I mean, as you heard, working from home is not a substitute for affordable, accessible childcare. It's kind of a Band-Aid over the bullet hole that is America's care crisis.
Can I go on maternity leave from motherhood?
And there it was, the hideous thing that divided the two kinds of women there were in the world that Rachel lived in. The working mothers and the stay-at-home mothers. Rachel knew the truth, which was that the culture was so condescending to stay-at-home mothers that we allowed them the fiction that being a mother was the hardest job in the world. Well, it wasn't. Having an actual job and being a mother is the hardest job in the world.
So would you have gone back to work, if you didn't have flexibility, if you couldn't work part-time from home at least?
Well, I really wanted to, but I don't know if it would have been possible. I couldn't find full-time childcare that made sense for us. Flexibility does allow us to make it work, barely.
And obviously, it's not just you.
It's not just me. I'm a statistic. About 70% of women with kids under 5 are working, and that's an all-time high. A lot of people are talking about this as this liberation for new moms, and even something that could finally close the gender pay gap. I was a little skeptical of that. Yes, more new moms than ever before are working, but what if flexible work just deepens longstanding inequalities in the workplace? To learn more, I sat down with Angela Garbez. She writes about motherhood, work, and society. And her latest book, Essential Labor, Mothering as Social Change, covers a lot of these issues. And a note, we use the terms mom and dad a lot here because that's how the folks captured in the data identify, but these ideas can apply to families of all shapes and sizes. Angela, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Monica.
Of course. I think we've arrived at this kind of surprising place where during the pandemic, everything fell apart and record numbers of women left their jobs. And I remember these predictions of a she session or that, women were never going to return to the workplace in the way that they had before the pandemic. But what's actually happened is we're seeing a lot of new moms, more than historically for decades, joining the workforce after having kids. But I don't know that the way that we're talking about that is just a purely good thing is really capturing the whole experience, right?
Right. I think many things can be true at once. I work because I have a sense of identity and satisfaction that I draw from it. But also I work because my family and we need 2 incomes, right? And so, yeah, there's positives, but I think it's also I'm just always curious and asking what's this underlying thing that's happening here, right?
Right. I mean, I can say personally, while I am very privileged to be able to get support and to have a job that's meaningful to me, the only way I was able to take it was because I can work from home several days a week.
Right.
And I am one of those working moms who doesn't have full-time childcare. So when my 2-year-old isn't with his grandparents or in part-time preschool, I have meetings interrupted all the time.
Yeah.
If he's sick, which he always is.
I know everyone, like every parent knows if a child gets sick, you're in a real, you're like, who can I call? Do I need to take the day off? Like, can somebody cover for me? Are we going to do a split day? Could I work from home? Like it's like a panic scramble that happens when a child becomes sick, and that's not the way it should be.
It is a total panic scramble, but it also feels like 2 full-time jobs.
Right. Yeah, it is a full-time job. If it feels like it's too much to manage for one person to figure out like 21 meals and 400,000 snacks a week, right? And do all the laundry and clean the house and like manage the schedule and logistics and pickup, like it's because it's too much. It's great that there's increased flexibility, right? Like I benefit from that. Many people benefit from that. And it can be true that many people are benefiting from that and many people are still left behind.
I wonder, Angela, if you think there's also a more insidious downside to these hybrid work arrangements for moms. We know that historically, becoming a mom hurts your earning potential. It is actually the biggest driver of the gender pay gap.
Mm-hmm.
And
which we should just point out, too, like that gender pay gap is becoming a mom, but like all women, whether you choose to become a mom or not, tend to suffer under that. You know?
Yes. But the lowest earners are those with children. The same is not true for fathers. And we've been hearing a lot as companies try to push for these return to office policies, how big a premium managers put on being in person.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder if by sorting into these flexible work arrangements, we could be establishing kind of a new mommy track where women who have children are less likely to get promoted, less likely to see career advancement because they're choosing the flexible hybrid option.
Right. And they're not around for, like, say, work happy hours. If that's like that sort of networking, like that's real and that happens. So you're not around for that, you know, like you having a boundary and having like responsibilities is seen as a con. It is effectively a new mommy track unless you have people who understand caregiver needs, making those decisions, right? And seeing like, oh yeah, these are valuable skills. Like someone being unavailable at 3 p.m. every day isn't actually like a massive problem if they can get their work done. And I'm skeptical that these women are re-entering the workplace in positions of like managerial power where they can insist on those flexible hours and the skills of caregivers and having those things not be detrimental to a work environment.
Yeah, it's a good point. The data shows participation, but it doesn't show the type of roles that women are taking.
Right. Yeah.
As you know, families come in all shapes and sizes. Not all of them have moms or dads. But in this conversation, we're mostly talking about parents who identify as mothers and the legacy of traditional gender roles that we're still grappling with today. In your book, you talk about a really fundamental difference between how mom works from home and dad works from home. Can you describe that?
Yeah. So I think it was a New York Times journalist named Claire Kane Miller, I believe, who found that if two parents were working from home, the mom was more likely to work from a like public or like unenclosed space, like no door, let's say that, like the dining room table, where at any moment she could be interrupted, you know, by a child whose iPad froze, right? Or just anything. Whereas the father was more likely to be working like behind a door in a closed, you know, can shut out that stuff. And I found that to be true to my life. So, you know, my husband is a wonderful person. We don't argue about whether or not my work is as important as his. But, you know, the world sends us a message because my husband is a union organizer who's, thank God, we have great benefits. But all of our healthcare benefits in his regular paycheck, you know, he's the one who earns that. I work for myself. I'm a successful writer. I have a great career. I have no guarantees, right? So we really had to like prioritize his work. So in our home, when I was trying to get any writing or do anything, I would most likely be working at the dining room table. And my husband, he was working in our uninsulated garage. And then he transitioned and he worked out of our daughter's room, you know, with like bunk beds in the background of his Zoom. But he still, like the crucial thing was he had a door. Like there was a boundary.
Do you think that in other shapes of families, families with same-sex partners, that there still tends to be a closed-door partner, one whose career takes a bit more precedent and one who takes more responsibility for nurturing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that because this sort of nuclear family heteropatriarchy is still the dominant form of culture, I imagine that there are relationships in which the one person comes down, the domestic work comes down to one person, and then the other partner is like the breadwinner, right? Or like more likely to be doing professional things when we're prioritizing that. I would like to think, though, that there's something that we can learn from different structures of families, which is more in line with how more people live in America, right? Any marginalized or like minority, family structure, they don't just have access to the same kinds of privileges. And so, when you think about all these women who are talking about who are not college educated, who are working service jobs, right, who do not have the option of working from home, what do? Like, people are making it work all around. And I think that like people who are operating outside of the mainstream notion of what a family is are already more in touch with leaning on community and having, an extended family that isn't necessarily bound by blood.
Right. It's the village versus the nuclear family.
Exactly. I mean, because the nuclear family is like an invention that's fairly recent historically. And it just happens to be the dominant idea here in America. And it's what we live under.
Right. Within that structure, I'm sure there are a lot of well-meaning partners like your husband who get the closed door when they're working from home. Mm-hmm. What can they do to make this division of labor at home more equitable?
Oh, just do more. It's hard. There's times when I've been like, with my husband, where I've been like, I don't want to have to tell you what I need you to do. What I want you to do is to anticipate those needs. And, what that requires, unfortunately, I hate to say it, is like time, honest communication, openness. The other thing that they can do is men need to take family leave, right? Men need to take full parental leave to show that like it is equal work and to figure that out. In the workplace, men should be transparent about their salaries so that we can talk more openly about the gender pay gap. Like there's like put the kids to bed, do the dishes, cook dinner, right? Like there's all of those things, but there's structural work to be done and like bigger conversations.
That's really interesting. So in addition to working to share more of the load at home, it's just as important to set a precedent in the workplace for what is expected of fathers.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing that we need to really talk about. Like 8 out of 10 voters in America support paid care policies, like paid family leave, affordable childcare, funding for community-based care and elder care, right? So when we're talking about 8 out of 10, like that transcends party lines, right? So we think about care as a like private issue, and we're all really like reluctant to talk about it because we don't want to admit that we have like needs because we're seeing that's like a weakness, right? But everyone has a care need, whether that's children, like biological children, whether that's fostering, right, or adopting. At some point, someone you love is going to need help, like your mom gets sick, your brother gets sick, and all of that is still being borne mostly by women. And so care is not a divisive thing. Care is a universal need that actually binds us all together. And so we need to be talking about care as a human issue, and that includes men.
I think what I hear you saying is that this is a really deeply entrenched inequality, the way that we deal with care when two parents earn an income. And it requires individual level change, societal level change, and a mindset change for all of us.
Yes. That's the thing. Until we solve, like at the root, the care problem in America, until we have universal health care, until we have paid family leave, until we have paid sick leave, until we have affordable childcare, pre-K, right? It's always going to be a problem.
In some ways, this conversation feels a little bit antiquated because we've been having it for so long.
Yeah.
Do you think that we'll ever get past this choice, this binary, kids or career?
Yeah, I do. Like, no one should ever have to choose between those things. But I'm someone who's like, I think one day we could get past wage labor, right? I think that like one day we can see ourselves as being deeply interdependent. I think it's hard. It's hard to hold on to that vision. But like, if I'm not here to like imagine or encourage my children to expect more from their lives, what am I doing?
Is there anything that you've implemented at home, you or your husband or both, to try to model what working should be for your daughters?
Yeah, I mean, I have been known to say to my children when they're like complaining about what I've made for dinner, where I'm like, I love you and I will always love you and I will always cook food for you, like until you're at least age 18, right? But like, this is work and I want you to see that as work. We talk about my husband's work. We talk about all the different kinds of work there is. And we also know that, like, daddy cooks dinner half the week and I cook dinner the other half. And that looks different. I've had to let go. Or like, I have standards of what I think dinner should be. Like, I don't, like, now I'm just like, someone's cooking dinner. That's great. And my girls see that, like, more and more equitable division of labor. And they see us navigating that. And my husband and I talk about it much more openly.
Yeah, we try this total responsibility transfer where when my husband is responsible for something, he's fully responsible for it.
Yeah.
And it's never how I would do it.
Exactly.
but if you intervene, then that is not total responsibility transfer.
Yeah. And that's the whole thing that, we could talk. There's a whole other conversation around maternal gatekeeping, right? Which is like a real idea that I have had to personally divest from, right? Because I didn't like it. I used to like reload the dishwasher because I didn't think my husband did it properly.
There is a correct way to do it.
Well, yes. But I really do think like if you want someone to like pitch in, like you gotta like, and this is a hard pill for me to swallow, but it's like, I don't need to criticize. I need to be like, yes, you are doing the work. You can do the work how you want to do it.
When you think about the future, what do you hope the working world will look like when your daughters grow up? What do you tell them about working, about having a job, or what success looks like?
Well, I mean, I have told them, I don't know to the extent to which they've absorbed it, but they will continue to hear this, that in a country that has privatized all human rights, when we have to like earn money to have healthcare and things like that, that all work for money is really like, it's a coercive condition of survival, right? Like, no matter how much I love doing my job, I do it because I have to, right? Because we need money. So it's about, balance. Like, I wish it weren't that way. Like, one of the things that I like teach them though is like, all work is valuable. All work is good. All work is important. All work is skilled. Like when we're at a restaurant and like it's taking a really long time for food, I'll be like, you know why it's taking? I mean, my 9-year-old now will be like, I know, because someone in the kitchen is working really hard. But like, that's true, right? Like, they know that like childcare is hard work and is important work. Yeah. So I mean, to me, like, success is being able to take care of your people and to live a life that feels good. And yeah, like work is just one piece of that.
Great. Well, Angela Garbez, thank you so much for being here with me.
Thank you for having me.
Well, that conversation raises a lot of interesting questions. But I'm wondering first, what surprised you most from that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Angela and I have a lot in common, but there were a few things that stood out to me that I hadn't really thought about. One was this idea that partners can help balance the scales at home, but also at work by taking the same amount of leave, by showing that it is a 50-50 responsibility when you have a child.
Yeah. I'm just thinking about my own relationship and how, we've kind of changed roles over time where one person's kind of the dominant parent for a while and then the other person takes it for a few years.
Yeah, and I think it's important to show your partner, your manager, your coworkers, show everyone in society that it is a shared responsibility. The other thing that surprised me is just how popular support for government-funded childcare is across Americans.
Okay, well, if it's so popular, then why has it been so hard to make it happen?
It's a good question. There have been a lot of opportunities to pass government-funded childcare and preschool in our history, but they've been blocked typically by Republican lawmakers every time. Just since 2020, childcare policies have been cut or diluted from legislation 9 times, according to a CNN analysis.
I'm a little surprised by that, but I guess there are a lot of different ideas about what it means to support families.
Yeah, and the U.S. has some of the most traditional views about the role of women and mothers in society. So there's historically been this view that government support should only be for very low-income families, under the stereotype that there are probably more single women, single mothers who have to work in those families, so they need support. But the majority of women should be home raising children. This is a perspective that came up in my research. I found this conservative activist from the 60s named Phyllis Schlafly, who was a key figure in blocking universal child care policies.
The women whose husbands have left them or divorced them or whatever have a hard time. It's very difficult for a woman to hold down a job and raise children too. But when you look at these so-called women who have to work, many of the women who are saying that are wives who simply want a standard of living higher than their husband is producing, crying around that they want somebody else to pay for their daycare.
Wow. So she actually said that.
She did, yeah. And, you know, she's a figure from decades ago. You might think that this idea has died out, but it's actually having a resurgence. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the term trad wives.
Trad wives.
It's short for traditional wives, and it is a corner of TikTok and social media that celebrates women returning to very traditional roles of homemaking and raising children.
Is this a big thing, or is this just something that social media has kind of blown up out of proportion?
Well, you know, I don't think it's a majority of Americans. I think it is a minority who thinks that this is the role of women. But historically, this vocal and powerful contingent of people who don't believe childcare is the responsibility of anyone but the mother have blocked childcare policies. You know, they think the government should really only step in with very low-income families and in the most dire circumstances. And even in recent years, you know, the Biden administration's efforts to pass childcare policies have been blocked by conservatives.
Okay, so I'm hearing that there's been failure at the federal level, you know, but this thing that you've been talking about with the challenges of connecting with childcare and what that does to working moms, I feel like there's a connection to the city planning stuff that I've been looking at. I mean, this comprehensive plan, for example, you know, maybe there's a way to address it through like an urban development approach rather than a political approach.
Really? Tell me more.
Okay. Well, we're trying to revive downtown Seattle, downtown Bellevue, all these downtowns around the region, right? Everybody wants people to come downtown. You know, employers want workers to come back downtown. Cities want workers to come back downtown. And there's probably a lot of parents with small children who'd like to do that, but, you know, they just can't make the childcare work out.
Right. I mean, this is what this conversation is about. It's not that new parents just love working from home because it's fun. It's the only way that some people are able to work now. So it's not as simple as just being told you have to be in the office 4 or 5 days a week now.
Right. So if cities want them to come, they have to make it easier for families. And that means neighborhoods in and around downtowns need childcare and schools. And they need more 2- and 3-bedroom apartments that families can afford. And it's actually happening here in a way. I mean, Mayor Bruce Harrell, for example, sort of passed this thing a couple of months ago that says developers can build much taller buildings in a certain part of downtown if they include a preschool on the street level.
Wow, so this is the kind of thing that we could actually see in the coming years?
Yep.
Well, I hope that that comes to pass because, you know, we talk about remote work and these return to office policies all the time. And I always try to just, you know, kind of raise my hand and say, this is an equity issue. You know, it's not that everybody is just working from home because they want to stay in their pajamas. A lot of people can only work because they have flexibility now. And it shouldn't just be an individual responsibility to address that. It should be a society, urban planning, political responsibility.
Yeah, well said.
All right, coming up next, the end game. For our game today, You know, Joshua, we talk all the time about how basic necessities like childcare and housing have gotten more expensive over time relative to income and inflation.
Yeah.
So I dug up some data to illustrate just how much more expensive, and I'm going to quiz you.
Oh, okay.
So we'll start with childcare. This one is a little tricky because the U.S. didn't start tracking childcare costs until the 80s when more women started working outside the home. You know, in the past, that's been a cost borne by women at the expense of careers. But there was a time in history when the U.S. had government-funded universal childcare. Can you guess when?
Oh, man. I have no idea, but I'll just take a wild guess. 1976?
Nope. Any other guesses?
I probably have to go way back. 1935?
Closer. Do you give up?
I give up.
Okay. It was during World War II.
Oh, of course. That makes so much sense because moms had to enter the workforce because many of the men were overseas fighting and they couldn't enter the workforce if they didn't have childcare.
Exactly.
During World War II, thousands of women workers in aircraft factories and shipyards could count on quality, subsidized childcare nearby. But after the conflict ended and men started to return to the factory, these childcare facilities were closed.
But can you guess how much it cost?
Oh, no. I mean, my grandpa used to talk about things costing, 25 cents, So, I don't know, $4 a day?
50 cents a day, which would be $8 a day in today's dollars, and it included lunch.
Wow, that would be $8 a day today
Can you
for
imagine?
childcare. I can't imagine. Well, labor was so much cheaper then. People didn't get paid as much.
True. So this universal childcare program, although very popular, ended with the war. Federal funding stopped for it in 1946.
It would be decades before the government looked seriously at the issue again, in spite of the steady stream of women moving into the American workforce.
And this was a real fork in the road for wealthy countries. This is when a lot of other countries like Canada also established public childcare. But unlike those countries, the U.S. repealed it and really never got on this path to implementing policies like this.
I never understood that this is why women then left the workforce. I thought it was just that men elbowed them out of their old jobs.
Well, this is one very sharp elbow. Okay, so around that same time, what do you think the average cost of a home in the U.S. was?
Okay, right after World War II. So, I don't know, $30,000.
Well, it's kind of a trick question. So in 1940, it was about $3,000. And if you adjusted for inflation for 2024, that would be $63,000.
Oh, my gosh. Okay, I was way off.
It's like less than it costs to buy a new car these days.
Yeah, wow.
So home prices stayed a lot lower for a couple of decades. In 1960, the average cost of a home was $11,900. That's about $123,000 in today's dollars.
Uh-huh.
But the 70s is when we started to really see housing costs more like what we'd expect today. Which, do you know what the average cost of a home in the U.S. is today?
Well, you mean in the Seattle area, it used to be approaching $1 million, but now it's probably like, I don't know, $850 or something, $830.
Interesting. Well, you are the Seattle guy, but nationwide, the average is...
Oh, like $650 or something. $600, I'm guessing, nationwide.
Lower.
Oh, $500.
$418,000.
Wow.
But it is average. It's not median, so that number is a little bit squishier.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, we have a booming email. If you have questions or comments about the economy, what it's like to live or work here, what kind of pets we have, email us at booming@kuow.org. I got to say, sometimes when I'm feeling a little lonely, I open that inbox and I'm waiting for that first one to come in. Hasn't
so
yet.
Sad.
All that's in there is an email from me that says test.
A special thanks to all you listeners out there who financially support KUOW. You make this show possible. If you want to help out, go to kuow.org/donate. And thanks.
That's it for Booming. Our producer is Lucy Suchek. Our editor is Carol Smith. I'm Joshua McNichols.
And I'm Monica Nicholsberg.
And we'll catch you next time.